There are certain nights when the human heart becomes very quiet. This does not happen because love has disappeared from your life. It happens because your heart is waiting in absolute silence, deeply hoping that it will not be wrongly understood by the person who matters most. If these exact words somehow manage to find you today, it is very likely that a part of your soul is already completely tired. You are exhausted from pretending that you no longer care about what happened. At the same time, another part of you still secretly hopes that someone, somewhere out there, is holding on to the memory of you just as strongly as you are holding on to them. The deepest truth of the situation is that someone loves you far more deeply than you currently realize. They do not love you in the loud and dramatic way that popular movies often show love. They do not show their feelings through perfect timing or through flawless words that are easy to say. Instead, their love shows itself through hesitation. It shows itself through emotional confusion and through a strange distance that actually hides their deep fear instead of showing a lack of interest. Before you completely convince yourself to walk away from this connection forever, you really need to understand something that most people discover far too late in life. Some hearts do not stop loving you just because they have become completely silent. Sometimes, this heavy silence is simply the very last defense mechanism of a soul that is terrified of losing what it cannot fully express in words. Human beings can be incredibly strange and complicated when it comes to the experience of love, especially when that love begins to feel real and permanent. We spend our entire lives believing that we want a deep emotional connection with another human being. Yet the exact moment someone truly touches the hidden, protected parts of our inner world, a deep fear begins to awaken inside us. The famous psychologist Carl Jung once spoke about the human unconscious mind as if it were a vast, hidden ocean lying beneath all human behavior. When someone genuinely loves you, they do not merely touch your surface personality or the social mask you wear every day. They accidentally awaken the abandoned, forgotten pieces that you have buried deep underneath your skin. When a message about silent love finally touches your heart, it opens up a space where others can begin to see the shared human experience of pain. It touches your deepest insecurities, your unmet childhood needs, your persistent loneliness, and your quiet longing to finally be chosen by someone without any conditions or rules. That specific kind of deep connection completely changes people. It shakes them up internally on a level they are not prepared for. It exposes emotional wounds that they spent many years successfully hiding from the rest of the world, and even from themselves. This is the exact reason why someone can deeply love you and still choose to pull away at the very moment you need their reassurance the most. It feels completely contradictory when you experience it, but from a psychological standpoint, it makes perfect sense. Love is not only warmth and comfort. Love is also total exposure. Love is complete vulnerability. It means standing entirely naked in front of another human being, desperately hoping that they will not use your natural tenderness against you as a weapon. The reality is that many people were never taught how to survive emotional intimacy when they were growing up. They only learned how to survive constant disappointment. They learned how to appear strong to the outside world. They learned how to suppress their natural emotions so they would not get hurt. Because of this background, they never truly learned how to safely receive love without feeling an overwhelming amount of fear. So when this specific person became emotionally attached to you, something deep inside them began changing in ways that they could not fully explain to you or to themselves. Your mere presence started heavily affecting their internal emotional state. Your silence suddenly mattered more than anything else. Your daily attention became the thing that emotionally regulated their nervous system. Your sudden absence became far heavier and harder to carry than they ever expected it to be. All of this terrified them to their core. Once another person gains the incredible power to emotionally affect your inner world, your subconscious mind immediately recognizes a massive risk. Suddenly, the idea of losing them becomes a real possibility. Suddenly, the old pain of abandonment feels completely imaginable again. Suddenly, your carefully protected independence no longer feels like a safe place to hide. Many people frequently confuse emotional distance with a total lack of love. But very often, emotional distance is actually the ultimate evidence of extreme emotional overwhelm. There are certainly people in this world who become cold because they truly do not care about you. But there are many others who become distant because they care far too much. This second type of person is much harder to understand because their outward behavior completely contradicts their inward emotions. Their heart naturally moves toward you, while their deep fear simultaneously pulls them away. One part of them wants total closeness. Another part of them constantly whispers about the fear of how everything might end just like it did before. Without even realizing what they are doing, they begin protecting themselves from a future pain that has not even happened yet. Maybe you have already felt this painful contradiction yourself in your own life. You have noticed the strange inconsistency, the sudden bursts of emotional warmth followed by weeks of absolute silence. You have noticed the way they look at you when they think you are not paying attention to them, and the way they remember the smallest, most insignificant things about you without making any conscious effort. You have felt the heavy emotional tension that exists even during ordinary, everyday conversations. Yet, despite all of this, something between you still feels completely blocked. Something feels entirely unfinished. It is almost as if their soul keeps leaning forward toward you, while their analytical mind keeps stepping backward into the shadows. This is exactly what unresolved emotional wounds look like in real life. People often imagine trauma as a form of dramatic destruction that everyone can see. But most emotional wounds are much quieter than that. They hide quietly inside attachment patterns, inside a constant fear of vulnerability, and inside sudden emotional withdrawal. Some people disappear emotionally the very moment they start caring deeply about you because closeness unconsciously reminds them of a specific pain they never healed from in their past. Perhaps they once loved someone who abandoned them when they needed them most. Perhaps they learned as young children that expressing their true emotions always led to direct rejection or punishment. Perhaps vulnerability once humiliated them so deeply that now their entire nervous system treats intimacy as an immediate physical danger. The most heartbreaking part of this dynamic is that they may not even consciously understand why they are acting this way toward you. The subconscious mind controls far more human behavior than people realize. If you find yourself still waiting for answers, you must recognize the reality of this pattern. If you are currently holding on to someone who went completely quiet, but you can still feel in your gut that they love you, you are not crazy. A person can genuinely love you while simultaneously sabotaging the connection because internally their nervous system associates love with massive emotional risk. They want closeness, but closeness immediately activates their deepest fear. They crave intimacy, but intimacy awakens their most painful vulnerability. As a result of this internal war, they begin sending mixed signals without even understanding their own actions. This is why emotionally mature love requires a high level of patience far more than it requires passion. Passion is relatively easy. Anyone can desire another person intensely for a brief moment in time. But true, lasting love asks something much harder from human beings. It asks them to remove their emotional armor piece by piece, even when they are terrified. It asks them to trust again after experiencing devastating disappointment. It asks them to remain emotionally open despite facing total uncertainty. For many people, that exact process feels completely terrifying because they have spent their entire lives building their identities around emotional self-protection. You must also understand something very important about the nature of silence. Silence is not always a sign of emptiness. Sometimes, silence is the sound of intense emotional processing happening just beneath the surface. Some people speak their emotions immediately because that is how they cope. Others disappear inwardly when their emotions become too strong for them to handle. They retreat deeply into thought, into total confusion, and into a fierce internal conflict. This is especially true for people who have spent their lives suppressing their vulnerability. Their silence is not intended to be a punishment for you. Sometimes it is simply their only method of emotional survival. However, this dynamic creates incredibly painful misunderstandings in relationships. One person interprets the silence as a form of personal rejection, while the other person experiences the silence as a form of necessary protection. One person feels completely abandoned, while the other person feels entirely overwhelmed emotionally. Slowly, two people who deeply care for each other begin to drift apart. This tragic separation happens not because their love disappeared, but because their fear became much louder than their communication. This is the exact point where many people choose to give up on a relationship far too early. They mistake emotional complexity for a total emotional absence. They assume that love should always look obvious, consistent, and completely easy. But psychologically profound connections are rarely simple. They forcefully activate the deepest, most hidden layers of human identity. They force people to confront their shadow selves, which include the insecure, wounded, and frightened parts hidden beneath their confidence and pride. Carl Jung believed that real love often becomes a mirror for us. It is not just a source of basic comfort, but a direct reflection of our unresolved self. This is why certain connections feel so spiritually intense and heavy. They force a major emotional awakening. They reveal behavioral patterns you never noticed in yourself before. They expose your fear of abandonment, your subconscious tendency to overgive to others, your deeply hidden fear of being unworthy of love, your desperate need for constant reassurance, and your hidden loneliness. Suddenly, another human being unknowingly becomes deeply connected to the parts of your identity that you did not realize were still actively wounded. The person you are thinking about may be experiencing this exact same internal chaos right now. They may lie completely awake at night replaying past conversations with you in their head, while pretending during the day that everything is perfectly normal. It is valuable to reveal more of the hidden psychology behind why people pull away, because it helps us understand the silent battles they face. They may fight a daily urge to send you a message because their emotional pride keeps interfering with their desires. They may miss you deeply while simultaneously convincing themselves that keeping their distance is absolutely necessary for their safety. You cannot endlessly sacrifice your own emotional well-being while hoping that your love will somehow magically heal another person's deep fear. Real human connection requires mutual emotional responsibility from both sides. Compassion is incredibly important in this life, but your own self-respect matters just as much. Understanding the deep emotional wounds of another person should never require you to completely abandon your own emotional needs in the process. This is exactly the point where emotional maturity becomes absolutely essential for survival. Emotionally mature love does not beg for tiny crumbs of attention. It does not destroy its own peace of mind just to prove its worthiness to someone else. It does not chase someone endlessly while completely neglecting its own basic human dignity. Mature love fully understands how to practice patience without falling into the trap of total self-abandonment. It knows how to create a supportive space for someone else without completely disappearing emotionally. It allows you to feel deep compassion for a hurting soul without losing your own personal boundaries. Sometimes, the absolute greatest act of love you can offer is not forcing a connection that is not ready to happen. Instead, it is allowing that person the necessary emotional space to confront themselves honestly. This is because real inner transformation can never be forced or controlled from the outside world. A person only truly decides to change when their own soul becomes completely tired of repeating the exact same painful emotional cycles over and over again. Perhaps this complicated connection entered your life not only to give you a beautiful experience of love, but also to awaken you psychologically. It may have arrived to teach you the massive difference between an anxious attachment and a genuine emotional alignment. It came to show you just how deeply you truly crave emotional reciprocity in your relationships. It arrived to force you to confront all the many ways you have historically ignored your own sharp intuition out of a deep fear of losing someone you cared about. Think very carefully about this reality. Have there been quiet moments in this relationship when your intuition whispered the absolute truth to you long before your conscious mind was ready to accept it? Were there moments where you could clearly sense their real feelings hidden beneath their guarded words? Human beings are naturally far more intuitive than they ever realized. The human subconscious mind is constantly reading emotional energy, subtle body language, sudden emotional shifts, long patterns of silence, fleeting eye contact, and underlying nervous tension. Long before your logical brain finally catches up to the situation, your soul often already knows exactly what is happening. That is the exact reason why certain people remain completely unforgettable to you. It is not because they were perfect partners, but because they managed to emotionally awaken something deeply asleep inside your spirit. That process of awakening is rarely a comfortable experience. Sometimes, a true awakening arrives through a deep sense of longing, through total confusion, or through a heavy emotional distance that forces you into deep inner reflection. It can happen through missing someone so deeply that you are finally forced to confront the intense loneliness you were trying to hide from. Pain has a very strange and specific psychological function in our lives. It strips away all of our comforting illusions. It exposes the raw emotional truth of our reality, and it clearly reveals exactly where our personal healing is still desperately needed. This is why some relationships completely transform your inner world, even when they never manage to become fully stable or functional on the outside. They force a profound inner growth. They force a higher level of conscious awareness. They force an ultimate emotional evolution. Perhaps this specific person is currently standing at the exact edge of that major transformation themselves. Maybe they are slowly beginning to realize that their usual emotional avoidance no longer protects them the way it once did when they were younger. Maybe your total absence from their life has finally forced them to confront the heavy feelings they tried so hard to suppress. Maybe they are finally beginning to understand that real lasting love cannot survive forever inside a dark cage of silence and pride. This is true because eventually every single human being reaches a critical moment where their internal loneliness becomes much heavier than their fear of vulnerability. When that inevitable moment arrives, people actually begin the process of changing. They do not change instantly, and they certainly do not do it perfectly, but they do it gradually. They begin to recognize the massive emotional walls they have built all around themselves. They start noticing just how often raw fear controlled their major life decisions. They realize how many beautiful opportunities for genuine human connection they actively sabotaged while simply trying to protect themselves from potential pain. For the very first time in their lives, they begin understanding that true emotional safety cannot exist without true emotional openness. This specific realization is completely life-changing. But while they are navigating their own difficult awakening, you must absolutely continue navigating yours. Do not allow their current uncertainty to destroy your own steady sense of self-worth. Do not let another person's emotional confusion convince you that you are somehow difficult to love. The exact way that someone responds to deep intimacy often reflects their relationship with themselves far more than it reflects your actual value as a human being. Many emotionally unavailable people are not withholding their love because you are unworthy of it. They are withholding it because they themselves are completely terrified. They are terrified of genuinely needing someone else. They are terrified of emotional dependency, terrified of facing rejection, terrified of losing absolute control over their lives, and terrified of being emotionally seen too clearly by another person. Ironically, the more deeply they feel love for you, the more vulnerable they feel. This dynamic creates a massive internal contradiction. They crave total closeness while resisting it simultaneously with everything they have. Unless they consciously choose to heal their past, they will remain permanently trapped between their deep desire and their paralyzing fear. But you simply cannot carry the heavy emotional burden for both souls. You can love someone deeply and still choose to maintain your own emotional balance. You can understand someone psychologically without constantly excusing their endless emotional inconsistency. Your compassion should never become a form of slow self-destruction. This is one of the most important lessons that emotionally awakened people eventually learn in this life. Love should always expand your spirit, not slowly erase it until there is nothing left of you. Yet, despite all of this immense complexity, there are still certain connections that are truly worth fighting for. These are the rare connections where two souls gradually learn each other's deepest fears with absolute tenderness instead of harsh judgment. These are connections where emotional walls slowly soften over long periods of time. These are connections where both individuals choose real healing instead of letting their ego win the battle. These beautiful relationships do exist in the real world, but they require total honesty, mutual accountability, deep vulnerability, immense patience, and incredible emotional courage. Most importantly, they require two people who are completely willing to stop running away from themselves. Every single relationship we enter eventually becomes a direct confrontation with the self. You cannot truly love another person while remaining completely disconnected from your own emotional truth. That is exactly why doing your shadow work matters so much. Shadow work is not simply a piece of popular spiritual language. From a psychological standpoint, it means facing the hidden, darker parts of yourself with absolute honesty. It means looking directly at the jealousy you try to deny, the fear you hide from the world, the loneliness you constantly distract yourself from, the emotional patterns you repeat unconsciously, and the old wounds you pretend no longer affect your daily life. Until people choose to confront these hidden layers within themselves, their relationships will continue repeating the exact same painful dynamics in different forms with different people. Perhaps this person is finally beginning to face their own shadow specifically because of your presence in their life. Perhaps your love became something far too real for them to ignore anymore. It was too emotionally honest, too real, and too psychologically awakening for them to push away. Even if they have not fully figured themselves out yet, something deep inside their soul knows that your connection matters immensely. Human beings do not struggle emotionally this deeply over people who mean absolutely nothing to them. Real, heavy emotional conflict only exists in places where genuine, deep attachment is present. That is why true indifference feels completely cold and simple, while real love feels incredibly complicated and emotionally alive. If someone truly does not care about you, their energy becomes completely flat, indifferent, and easy to read. But when someone deeply loves you while simultaneously battling a massive inner fear, their energy becomes highly inconsistent, emotionally charged, completely confusing, and intensely heavy. You can easily feel their intense internal conflict, even when all words are completely absent from the room. You have probably already sensed this exact dynamic yourself. You have felt the powerful emotional pull, the heavy feeling of things left unfinished, and the strange intuitive knowing that beneath all of the silence, something incredibly real still exists. Because of this, you have likely questioned your own sanity repeatedly. Maybe a part of you keeps wondering if you are simply imagining things that are not actually there. But deep emotional intuition rarely appears without a valid reason. The human subconscious mind is constantly perceiving real emotional truths that are hidden beneath surface behavior. Still, you must always balance your strong intuition with practical wisdom.